and Catherine worked in NUI Galway in I suppose the CELT. It's CELT in NUI Galway, the Centre for Education or Centre for Excellence in Learning and Teaching in NUI Galway. And then Catherine went on to become an education developer, a strategic digital education developer with the National Forum. So she's an open researcher and she's very passionate about this area in open education, and her own PhD explored educational practices, OEP in higher education. And so we're delighted to have Catherine here. She has been leading out on lots of really interesting initiatives with the National Forum, in particular the National Index Digital Experience Survey, which we all took part in. Can you believe it? Before COVID, little did we know what was coming down the line. And all of our students took part in Index as well, along with the whole country. So that has been a really powerful initiative in I suppose, gauging where we are in digital teaching and learning in Ireland. And we're looking forward to taking part in that next year. It'll be interesting to see how that, how we fare up now after our whole digital year in teaching and learning. So listen, I'm going to hand over to you now, Catherine, and thanks very much.
Okay, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Thanks for inviting me. And so thanks to all who organized the week, because I've dipped in a little bit, and I really appreciate this week and also all you've done around digital ed, because as you know, I've been in touch with you since you started the Digital Ed project, and just so enthused by just the breadth and depth of what's in that set of resources, and the fact that they're all open, so that people can use them and adapt them as they wish. So thank you. And I'm also really grateful that for the digital champions that are going to join today. Karina and Jessica asked me to speak about open education, which I'm always happy to do, but I wanted to be sure that it was relevant for your contexts and what people's needs and priorities are right now. So I'll aim to do that. I have, one or two questions I'll ask you during the presentation, but then the panel at the end with digital champions will be an opportunity, hopefully, to kind of dig into some of the ideas, just as I said, in relation to your context. So I'll just share my screen, see if we can get everything to work here.
Right, I'll go back in here. Okay, sorry, I wanted to open it in the background that it was open. 1 second.
Apologies, everyone. Anyway, I can start speaking anyway. My intention was really to, sometimes when we talk about open education, we get into the nuts and bolts around open licenses, Creative Commons licenses, the different types of Creative Commons licenses. And I will refer a little bit to that, but what I thought might be most valuable today was just to speak about some of the, what open education is, open educational resources and practices, why it's valuable, particularly in the context that we're in now, this kind of post-COVID context, share some kind of compelling examples of how other educators have used open educational practices and resources, and then give you some resources that you can follow up afterwards. So that's why I like to share the slides, because everything that's in the slides is hyperlinked, so that you can see and follow along, even well after this presentation. So the next slide, Karina, after the title slide.
It's actually gone off my screen. It's like it won't move. It's
okay.
I wonder would it be because it's in a Google.
If you click on that screen, if you click File, click on File over on the left.
Hold on now. It's actually just gone off my screen. I don't know why. I'll just try it again.
If you click File and go down to Download, you can download it as a PowerPoint and then just share it through PowerPoint, if you know what I mean. So
yeah, let's try that again. Thanks, Eamon.
No worries.
It's just not opening for me now. Jessica, is it opening for you? The file won't even open for me.
Yeah.
Very strange. Will you try sharing it, Jessica?
Okay, so Kevin shared it.
A team effort.
Yeah, I don't know. It's like my click
Fantastic.
feature is not working in Teams. It's like it's gone to sleep on this device.
Kevin, are you okay to help Catherine with her slides?
Yeah, no problem. I can
All right,
keep
thank
sharing
you very
here,
much.
no problem.
The next slide is just, I'm starting, as I said, at the very high level, not really talking about the how we do open education, but really what it's all about. And this is written by two people who lead at Creative Commons, which is, the most universally used type of open license that you can use to create open educational resources. And they say here that open education is not, they don't want us to get fixated on kind of short-term fixes, but really to keep that high-level view. It's a long-term solution, open education, to ensuring equitable, inclusive access to effective educational resources. And a lot of the words in this sentence are words that we've been talking about this year, particularly say the last 14 months. And as I've often said, whatever any of us may have known about inequality before March 2020, we all certainly know a lot more now, with respect to education, certainly, but also more broadly in society. So on the next slide, I will share this quote from UNESCO. So open education has a very, very long history. So education is about sharing, after all. But the open education movement and the terms that we use now, like OER and OEP for open educational resources and practices, that work is about 20 years old. So the term OER was coined in 2002. And UNESCO has been one of the major players in kind of helping to educate people globally about the reasons why open education is so important. And they published this call to action last April, as you can see, in the very early days of the pandemic. And it was really a call to action for us as educators. And they say, in the spirit of a joint implementation of the OER recommendation, which they published the previous year, UNESCO calls on the global community to support the use of OER for sharing learning and knowledge openly worldwide, again, with a view to building more inclusive, sustainable, and resilient knowledge societies. So the next slide, I just have a couple of slides really briefly about definitions, because I know a lot of you probably know what OER and OEP mean, but for those of you who might be new to it, I just include these few slides, and there'll be a review for everybody else, I suppose. So OER is just an acronym that stands for Open Educational Resources, and they're resources in the areas of teaching, learning, and research. We most typically talk about them in digital form, but they don't have to be in digital form. And they either reside in the public domain or have been released under an open license. And I've bolded kind of the key terms there. So open license is a key part of this that permits no cost access, use, adaptation, and redistribution by others. So it isn't just that the resources are free. It isn't just that you've created something and you've put it online and you say, well, anyone can use it. Because what stops anyone being able to reuse it, of course, is copyright law, which varies by country, but basically means that you have to ask permission in order to reuse something. So if you create any educational resource, it could be, yes, it could be a course or a textbook, it could be a lesson, it could be an assignment, it could be a rubric, it could be an image, anything that you use in relation to your learning or teaching. You can attach an open license, a Creative Commons license, to it. And then when you publish it online, anyone that comes across it anywhere at any point in time will know that you as the creator permit this reuse for them. So the next slide just is kind of a differently expressed definition of OER. David Wiley calls open educational resources that permit the 5 R's. So OER are resources that are not just free, but free with permissions. And these are the permissions that you typically get. So you can make your own copies of the resource, you can use them, you can change them around, translate them to another language, add context-specific examples, remix them with your own work to create something new, and redistribute them and share them with others. And they're particularly used, as I said, in teaching contexts. So my presentation is an OER, if you like, this presentation. I shared the link with you. I put a CC license on it. It's on the first slide and the last slide. And wherever I use someone else's work, you'll see the little CC by terms. And that's just me showing that I acknowledge the creators of the image, in this case, and David Wiley's idea. But of course, moving to the next slide, of course, education isn't just about content alone, although that is really important. Education aren't the only institutions and bodies that are practicing openness, and increasingly cultural heritage collections are being openly licensed. So you might be aware of some of these. On the left is from the Smithsonian Institute. On the right is from the Rijksmuseum, one of the leaders in this area. And these huge and valuable cultural heritage collections are increasingly being released under CC licenses, in this case, CC0. So again, this is work that we can use both in creating educational materials, if we're educators, helping our students to engage, with these collections, remixing them, reusing them, and so on. So there's so much potential around open content. But as I said, education isn't just about content. So the next slide is the second acronym we talk about a lot with open education, and that's OEP, Open Educational Practices. So that encompasses the use and reuse and creation of OER, but it broadens it out, as it says here, to collaborative pedagogical practices. Usually involves things like open tools, open platforms, social media, perhaps, so that learners and teachers can interact, encourage peer learning, knowledge creation and sharing, and ultimately empowerment of learners. So those are, when I talk about OER and OEP, that's, those are the definitions, but I think it's probably clear if I share some examples. So in the next slide, I just want to do a quick poll, and we'll see if this works. The next slide is the actual poll itself. If you just go to pollev.com and type in the term there, Catherine Crow 828. I set this up as an anonymous poll. If it asks you for your name, you can press skip. But you can click on any of these that relate to you. So given what I've said so far regarding your open practice, which options apply to you? Maybe you have no previous experience. Maybe you use OER. Maybe you go ahead and even create and share some of your own resources as OER. Do you use it in your teaching? Do you support others? Or perhaps maybe at an institutional level, do you create policy that supports the use of OER? So this may not be running because I am not running it on my machine. So, but I can use the chat though, because I can see the chat. So if anybody wants to just, I can go on to the next slide. But if anyone wants just to put a little bit about themselves, no previous experience, very experienced, maybe what discipline you use it in, or so on, that'll be helpful for me, just keeping an eye on the chat.
It's working, Catherine. It is working.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, I can't see the display. I'm not sure if there's an option there for who's ever sharing the presentation to click on sharing the results. Okay, that's the bit. I think it may not be doing because it's not me who's logged in and running that. That's what I'm suspecting. But anyway, I would be happy. Thank you for doing that. I'd be happy if people want to put it in the chat. Again, just to give me an idea. Okay. All right. So before I go on to share some examples, there's a couple of things I think that are useful to share about why this is important. Because yes, we can talk about creating an open textbook and the specifics of that, but why is this useful? Why is it useful for students and why is it useful for staff? And I've identified 3 areas that we usually talk about when we talk about why OER and OEP are valuable. And so the next slide just identifies those 3 areas, and they're access, equity, and pedagogy, and I have a slide for each. So the next slide talks about access. So this is the one that we most immediately think of when we think about open education. So if you as an educator are using open educational resources, let's say an open textbook in your course, your students can save money because they can access that, that textbook without paying for it. We also, of course, often give students resources through the library, but open educational resources have a further advantage even to those, because if you share open educational resources as learning materials for use by your students, students have access to those before they're enrolled in a module, before they're enrolled as students. Perhaps if they have to take a break and study, they have access to them, and beyond the time that they're student, they have access to them. Teachers, you know, there are very many of us as educators who may have begun teaching online for the first time a year ago. As Karina mentioned, we know from the Index survey that 70% of staff who teach at Irish higher education institutions had not taught in a live online environment before March 2020. So open educational resources provide a huge wealth of material that you can use, reuse, adapt, and so on to develop your own teaching and learning materials. And in general, anyone with internet access, anyone in the communities we live and work in, anyone in Ireland, anyone globally, if you share open educational resources, anyone can access those. So, particularly those of us who work in publicly funded institutions, this is something that's, many people feel we should be doing. We should be sharing educational content openly. The second area is equity. And this digs in a little bit more into the advantages for students. Again, reducing costs for students in general. We know from research that was done over the course of the past year that many students experienced new financial constraints because of COVID or exacerbated existing financial hardship. So reducing costs for students is obviously of great benefit. Persistent availability of resources I've already mentioned. An enormous one is the third one, open for addressing diversity, equity, and inclusion. We perhaps have all had the experience, those of us who are teachers or in any context, all had the experience of using a textbook or a resource that wasn't quite right. And not only maybe was it not quite right, but it didn't really address the diversity of students that we teach. Perhaps the language is not inclusive by gender. Perhaps it's not inclusive by race. Perhaps it's not inclusive by culture or socioeconomic status. And we would like to change that to make it more representative of the students that we're teaching and we're working with. Open educational resources enable us to do that so that our teaching and learning materials can be more equitable and inclusive. And overall, in general, addressing these equity issues helps us to support Sustainable Development Goal number 4, which is a goal for all of us in higher education. The next slide just talks about one specific aspect of this concept of equity. And I know this has probably been touched on many times during the week, so I won't go into too much detail, but the fact that we may not even know which, students and staff, indeed, don't have what's called meaningful connectivity. So sometimes this is called the digital divide, but I really like this term meaningful connectivity because the digital divide sometimes implies a binary, that there are people that have connectivity or that don't. But last year, the Alliance for Affordable Internet published this definition of meaningful connectivity. So if you have an appropriate device and enough data and the right speed in order to use the internet regularly, then you have what's known as meaningful connectivity. So that involves a lot of things. That involves a device, connection, adequate Wi-Fi, a space to work, and so on. So the next slide is just, there are so many aspects to equity that we really need to be aware of. But the third kind of area of value in terms of open educational practices and resources is pedagogy. And that's probably what we could talk most about today, but I'll just highlight a few pointers on the next slide. So many different areas that open education can enhance our pedagogy. So we can adapt and use OER in context. So in your discipline, in Ireland, in Galway, in Mayo, and make the materials really context specific for our students. Invite students to co-create OER with us. So we don't just have to source open textbooks or open course materials. Students can participate in that co-creation process. We can design authentic forms of assessment. This is something that's been talked about a lot this year. And again, when we talked about moving away from formal examinations. So I'll share a few examples now, in just a moment of forms of authentic assessment where students can actually create, real world resources, contribute to public knowledge instead of taking, a written exam. And OER enable us to do that. And by engaging in all of these practices, both in the learning and in assessment, we help students develop digital and data literacies, in fact, and we know that these are really kind of lifelong learning skills and things that are important for all of us. So, again, there's so many advantages to using open educational practices, diversifying the curriculum so that all feel represented, and then just so many examples of local and global collaboration, and I'll give a few in just a moment. So that's why, we often use OER and OAP. So I have about 4 or 5 really quick examples here, just one slide each, because I've probably been talking in the abstract so far, and I think it's important just to look at a few really concrete examples, just to get an idea of how people use it. So the first is co-creating open textbooks. Because of this cost element being so important for very many students, some institutions, and the first quote there is from the City University of New York, CUNY, actually put in their course catalogs where students can choose course sections, or we would say modules. They use a code, ZTC, for zero textbook courses, so that students can actually choose modules where they won't have to purchase a textbook. And from work that they've done and studies that they've done, they found that this is really important and attractive to students. In CUNY, for example, the librarian Stacey Katz from CUNY spoke at an event in Ireland earlier this year, and she described the student body at CUNY as diverse in every single way except socioeconomically. So this is a huge consideration for them, as I think it is for all of us. The second quote is from Robin DeRosa, who's a leader in the area of open educational practices and open pedagogy. And she describes in her work how she started by trying to save students money, but then found that the pedagogical benefits far outweighed the financial benefits. So that whole notion of students being co-authoring materials, publishing things in the open, creating knowledge, much more broadly than just within, a simple course or program community was immensely valuable. And that's why she continues it. And that's why many people continue it. So co-creating open textbooks is one example. Another example on the next slide is student-created OER. This is from Bonnie Stewart at the University of Windsor in Canada. Bonnie was a guest speaker at a National Forum webinar last October, which some of you might have been at, about data literacies. And these are her students who are, trainee teachers, undergraduates, and they were looking at all the different kind of third-party tools that teachers might use. So Zoom, Kahoot, Mentimeter, et cetera, et cetera. And instead of, writing reflections or writing a short paper or writing a report, what they co-constructed were these short YouTube videos where they would kind of compare two tools or talk about one tool. And they actually created a library of YouTube videos. So this is what we mean by authentic assessment. So they demonstrated their knowledge by creating open resources that are now of value to anyone in the world, who is interested in kind of looking at these tools. So the links are there. They're also on Twitter, and the link to the YouTube collection is there. It's a really lovely example of authentic assessment and student-created OER. The next example, excuse me, is again collaboratively co-created OER, again with students. And this is a lovely project from the State University of New York called And Still We Rise. And it was students, their lecturers, and librarians working together. And they realized that there was a 50-year collection of Black political and cultural leaders who had visited SUNY Plattsburgh to speak over the years. And these were all buried in the library archives. So together, the students created this online and physical exhibit called And Still We Rise. So it was, again, demonstrating and synthesizing this historical data, but creating something that was open for their community and for anyone, on the web. So again, lovely example of engaging students, authentic assessment, and again, an alternative to, to written forms of assessment. The fourth example on the next page is creating and editing Wikipedia articles. I know some of you are probably aware of this. Probably the the quote that I love the most when I talk about this is from Ewan McAndrew, excuse me, where he says, "Don't cite Wikipedia, write Wikipedia." And again, this is all folded in with digital literacies again. So we know, all of us know, if you do a Google search on something, you know, the first or second item that comes up will be a Wikipedia article. So, you know, we're geared towards Wikipedia. Well, let's, you know, look under the hood of Wikipedia. Let's teach students about, you know, the history tab, how it's authored, how it's edited, who edits it, and create, again, public knowledge that the world uses in whatever area you're in: business, science, mathematics, and so on. And again, there are lovely examples, you know, from University of Edinburgh, Case Western University here, but there are more. But these are two that I think are excellent. So, you know, if you're thinking about doing this, these are some lovely places to look, you know, to get some ideas about how people do it. The next slide, I think we're kind of going on to resources. Yeah, so just go through these really quickly. I just wanted to share some things that you can go back to. So there's a lot of academic literature around open education. This is from my own research, which I did at NUI Galway, about how, whether, why, and how staff who teach used open educational practices. And this was kind of my PhD finding in one slide, as I often say. And that is that probably the most important thing to realize about open is that it's not binary. I mean, it's not like I'm open, I'm not closed. It isn't like that. It's very personal. It's, you know, what you feel comfortable doing, you know, in yourself and with your students. It's contextual. You know, it depends on who you are in the world, as well as who you are, you know, do you teach social work or do you teach engineering or computer science? You know, so it's very much an individual thing, engaging in open practice. And I often recommend just starting with, you know, starting small and finding allies and talking about it. And it's continually negotiated. So, you know, I shared this presentation today with an open license, but, you know, perhaps I might do a presentation for another group that would have sensitive information, and I might not share that openly. So there are no have-tos about openness. The next slide is, I'm not going to talk much about this. It's an evolving curriculum called Equity Unbound that I was engaged in starting 3 years ago with Mahabali and Mia Zamora from Egypt and the US, respectively. And it was about collecting equity-focused intercultural learning resources and engaging in them openly. So we had our students, when I was still at NUI Galway, we connected our students with these learning resources. And now that community is much bigger. And over the past summer, Equity Unbound shared this wonderful collection of resources for online community building. I know people in Ireland have been using them. I had very little to do with this collection. I'm involved in Equity Unbound, but you know, this was the labor of a lot of people apart from myself. But lovely ideas if you're trying to build community in your classrooms. An open resource. The next slide is our international resources. I just put them all here. The one in the middle is where some of the examples I shared came from, like the "And Still We Rise" example. So these are places that you can, again, just leaving them here for you to dig into if you want to look at further examples. And the next slide are what we have available from the National Forum. So there's a lot of international examples, but what's available for students and staff in Ireland? In 2019 and 2020, we published those two guides on the right, which help people figure out how to license things. But we found that there were a lot of questions about, how do I know what license to pick? How do I know what license to pick for this particular thing? How do I get started? So the resource on the left was just published about a month ago. All these resources are available on the URL there. And it's a kind of self-paced, very simple visual resource called Using OER and OEP for Teaching and Learning. And I invite you just to look at it in your own time. And it's just, you know, a series of short pages drawing on a lot of the sources I've shared with you today. Just for getting started with OER and OEP. And this is my last slide, thank you, is, again, I just want to circle back to the work that DigitalEd has been doing, because despite all the great work that's done internationally and even nationally by the National Forum, the way that open practice really becomes embedded is in the communities, you know, that we learn and teach in. So, even in the National Forum, we know, like going from upper left over to the right, that sometimes it's a matter of supporting one person and learning how to license something, and getting that license right. But widening the lens a little bit more, it's really effective to think about doing it, say, at a course level or a program level, within a particular discipline, within a particular program, and then at an institution, and then, of course, nationally and more broadly. So in the National Forum, I've had the pleasure and honor to be able to, to collaborate with people across all institutions, and try and support policy making and OER and OEP. But it's it's people like Karina and Jessica and all the people who are behind putting this event on, where hopefully you'll have bedded in support for what you're doing, and of course you'll all support each other as well, because that's really how it works. And I encourage you, if any of the examples I shared really excites you or you think relates to what you're doing, I invite you to contact the person who did it, Bonnie Stewart or any of those people, because open educators by nature want to share their work and want to engage about it. So it's a lovely community of people. And I think that's it. I think that's my wrap up. And I'd just love to kind of have a look at the chat now, and also to chat with you, chat with the panel. Thank you.
Thanks a million, Catherine. Now, will we take some questions now, or will we'll go straight into the panel? Is that the plan, that we'll go straight into the panel, or would you like anybody to ask any questions?
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to chat with the panel, because I think those are people who really have active questions and examples, and then maybe keep an eye on the whole group.
No, perfect. I think the examples you shared are fascinating, the authentic assessment examples. And I had just put in the chat there, it's interesting, you probably know we have a partnership or a collaboration with SUNY and CUNY, and we're fortunate to meet colleagues that you probably know in CUNY and in the wider SUNY network. And it's just fantastic to see some of those authentic assessment examples that we can explore a little bit further. So we might talk about that again.
There has definitely been a reawakening of interest in open education in the last year for a lot of those reasons. So if authentic assessment is an area that you're really interested in, passionate about, want to explore more, just know that there's a huge body of work in this area of open education, that people have been doing that for a while. So there's so much, that you can draw on and be inspired by.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So listen, we're going to get the panel to turn on their cameras, and I will just call out the panel members again. And we have, where's the listing? I want to make sure I have everyone listed here. So we have Amaya, we have Catherine, and we have, hold on, I get all the names. Okay, so we have Catherine Briggs. Hi, Catherine. And you met Catherine earlier. Catherine is a systems librarian here in GMIT, and Catherine has been involved with lots of open education initiatives in GMIT. So great to have you, Catherine, on the panel. We have Dr. Trevor Clohessy, and he is one of our digital champions, and he's a lecturer in the School of Business. And I suppose your area of interest is very grounded in blockchain, but also you're very interested in this space of open education, Trevor. So thanks for coming along today. And we have Ulrich Hosch, and Ulrich is a lecturer in the Galway International Hotel School, and he's a digital champion also. So thank you, Ulrich. And I know he's exploring lots of initiatives at the moment in virtual learning environments on a teaching and learning project we're working together on. And then we have Dr. Amaya Vega. Amaya's there. I think she's beside you, Catherine. And Amaya is a lecturer in economics in the School of Business. And she's also a great promoter of digital education and a digital champion in the school. So thanks very much to all of you being on the panel with Catherine.
Thanks.
Thank you.
I would love to know what you're all doing, or if this strikes any chords, or maybe you can share with me what you're doing.
Catherine, sorry, Trevor, do you want to go ahead?
Thanks, Amaya. Yeah, no, I've had experience of Open before, contributing to Open textbooks. I'm a big fan of them, because one of the big inhibitors to students, as you know, is the high price of textbooks, particularly in blockchain. So I'm kind of researching at the moment this idea of an open blockchain textbooks that can be freely available. And I suppose my question, Catherine, is in terms of adoption. How do you see adoption in Ireland for open source, access? I know the tools. I'm a big fan of open source technologies and tools, but regards absolutely have you seen a kind of an upward trend here in Ireland in terms of adoption to that kind of resource?
I absolutely have, and particularly just recently, just in the last year or two. So, for example, I know a couple of institutions are using Pressbooks. DCU is describing in an event a couple of weeks ago that they were able to get a free license, but it's temporary. NUI Galway has invested in a license. This is all, you probably know this already, but so it's important to have some kind of platform to do that. But most people just start by adapting an open textbook and just getting used to it. Then you get used to the concept of it and the platform, and then you can go into authoring, your own textbooks. But I would definitely recommend, DCU and NUI Galway are just getting on that train, so you could probably learn a lot from them, what they're doing.
Thanks, really, Patrick.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think NUIG have their Open Scholarship Week next week, and they are presenting on that ReaderPress platform, so you can join and have a go in action if you haven't used open textbooks. So that's a great opportunity for people. Yeah.
Great, thanks, Catherine.
I mean, for the library, what we're doing, I mean, we've always, trying to be about open access in terms of open access journals, open access publishing, open access data, and just moving it on slightly. We'd love to collaborate and communicate with lecturers who are interested in adding open access, open educational resources to their reading lists. It'd be brilliant. We have a number of LibGuides on open access resources, open scholarship, anything to do with open. We are interested, and we have been for years. And, it has been, it's really come to the forefront with COVID at the moment for open educational resources. Some lecturers may have problems with their reading list during COVID because a lot of, especially the Irish textbooks, aren't available as e-resources. And so that's a major issue, expecting students to have, obviously they want it to be relative, they want it to be, Irish, but if the textbooks aren't available, we can't purchase them. And when, students see them available, you may be, on, not in Creative Commons licenses, they're just, people put up, PDF documents of textbooks, we can't link them through the library. We have to look at licensing and copyright, etc. And so obviously we try and do our best always to have these resources available. But it's, it does come down to cost, obviously more than cost, as Catherine said, but a lot of it is due to cost and availability. And the prices of some e-textbooks just skyrocketed over the last year, like something like 200% increase in some of the e-textbooks. And as well as that, if you're looking on Amazon, it says, oh yeah, 20 quid for an e-textbook. That's for a personal book. When a library goes to order it, you're talking, thousands. So we do our best, but I definitely think open educational resources are a great way for going forward for the college, to get on the bandwagon. And, I think the universities are always a step ahead because, again, we'll talk about money, look at getting funding to have a proper pilot of these open educational resources.
Catherine, that's amazing. And, what you're talking about is what I've seen in other countries as well, is that where it really takes off is where there is that partnership between, staff who teach and library staff, kind of doing it together. And then, as you mentioned too about universities, AIT, we probably know Celine Penyan. She was on the team that developed that open resource that I mentioned, the National Forum Open Resource that we just published. Amazing. We couldn't have done that without a librarian, on the team. And I know they just recently published a subject index, because one of the big dilemmas for people is, well, where do I find open textbooks in psychology or business or whatever? So they produced the subject index for just the subjects in AIT. Is that something that you're doing, or?
We are looking at that. We have, at the moment, we just have the BC Campus subject directory in our LibGuide, but we are, hoping to make it more relative to just GMIT. So that's one of our summer projects that we'll hopefully be working on.
It's just continual, isn't it? It's just
I mean, everything's changing. It's just trying to keep ahead of the game. But once things are open, it's it's not about reinventing the wheel. You just use the resources that are there, and obviously give credit for them. So yeah.
Yeah, Catherine, was fantastic presentation. I'm very interested. I'm new to Open Scholarship Community Galway, I have to say, and I take the opportunity. I know Catherine said it already, but they're holding their week, Open Scholarship Week next week, and we have a competition, a prize competition on Friday, the 14th of May. If anyone's interested in joining us, it's with great examples of open scholarship, and you will see who wins that. But from my perspective, I've been engaged with open education resources and creating open education just from the perspective of my own discipline. I teach econometrics, and in terms of sharing code and engaging students in using open code in OR language, and to interact with the code and to produce things that are more relevant to what we are covering in lectures. But my question for you, Catherine, is I'm very interested in authentic assessment, and I like to incorporate this into my teaching practice. I can see the advantages of open education, OEP, but how do we get there? What's the transition from your research? What's the transition to that point? How is that done?
Yes, it's. I guarantee that anybody that you ask that practices, open education practices would say gradually, because it's a matter of experimentation, and it's so difficult to say because, again, it depends on the teacher's comfort level with open. So, for example, some teachers who teach particular subjects may be active on Twitter, and they may say, okay, well, I might want to have a Twitter chat with some of the authors of the text that we're reading. Other, educators may not have anything to do with social media. They don't want to do it that way, but they're really interested in doing the open textbook route or publishing on Wikipedia or whatever. So it's a matter, I think, of perusing examples of how other people have done it, and then usually something rings a bell. That's what happened with me. I mean, way back in 2010, I read about a project in a primary school about primary kids editing Wikipedia, and I was teaching IT students at that time, and I thought, we should be doing that, so, and that's kind of how it happens. And then you learn from others' practice, and it doesn't have to be people right next to you. It can be people anywhere in the world. But the beauty of doing it in 2021 is that, there are so many published collections now of this work. That's why I included the resources there. But I think just doing it gradually, doing it hand in hand and in partnership with students. If you're thinking about using a particular tool, ask them what they use, ask them what they would be comfortable with. Doing it in that hand-in-hand way, I think, is the key. Okay. And then learning and reflecting and adapting as you go.
Great, thank you. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Catherine, I'm very new to the whole idea of OER. I haven't used it yet, but I just wonder now. A lot of teachers during the pandemic now have started blogs or podcasts to share knowledge openly. Is there any restrictions on that of the usage of those because they are openly available, or should there be a license attached to those kind of things as well to use them?
Yeah. So this is one of the biggest pieces of education about open is that. Anything that can be digital can be open, right? So in the past year, we've made a lot of things digital, as you say, podcasts and all different kinds of digital resources. And many people who haven't understood or encountered open education before will just share it. They'll put it up on a WordPress site or whatever. But then anyone who finds that doesn't know how they can reuse it or repurpose it or edit it unless it has an open license. So it's a big piece of the work that I know DigitalEd is doing and we're doing in the National Forum is, for example, all of the National Forum resources, everything that we create and share has a CC BY license, which is one of the most open licenses. It means you can do anything with this as long as you put an attribution to the National Forum. In addition, any work that receives funding from the National Forum must have an open license.
Okay, so that's good to know for the project going forward as we do.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it's one of the ways that we are what we call building open capability, you know, in the sector. But again, you know, it can't be done nationally alone. Hopefully within the institutions, like through the work of Catherine and so on, the LibGuides, you know, anytime you come across someone who's sharing something openly, you can just ask, you know, would you think about putting a Creative Commons license on that? So, because I would think these digital resources are going all over the world, you know, and the open license just sits on it. It doesn't change copyright in any way. It's just layered on top of copyright. So whoever finds that resource knows automatically what they can do with it and what they can't do with it.
That's great. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I wonder, Catherine, can I just ask, I think, you know, one of the major issues with openness in terms of any type of openness, open access, open education resources, is about trust. You know, how do people trust the information that's there? So how do we get people to trust openness is kind of what I'm thinking. You know, we can advocate it, we can promote it, but, you know, what do you think are the key, you know, factors that we can, you know, tell people about trusting these resources?
That's such a great point. And I think, you know, some of the initial steps, that's why I think it's important to have kind of subject index, you know, for your institution where librarians maybe are curating a collection of repositories or like BC Campus sources or whatever and saying, hey, these are good. You know, we've checked these out and these are good. And then when people get used to, you know, engaging in open practice, what often happens is you have networks of people that you're aware of who are open educators, and then what they recommend, you know, you trust, you know, because we have networks of trust. So, for example, for me, you know, being able to connect with a lot of other open educators on Twitter, you know, has been a big piece of that. So these initially, I think it's really important for the institution and particularly the library to kind of afford people those first steps and saying, listen, these are good. We know these are good. But then as people get more confident, they'll probably, you know, swim out further in the pool.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks. I think when you mentioned about the, you know, in America that they put the code in the courses, if there's, you know, OER resources as part of the reading list, that's a brilliant thing to do, you know, because the students, you know, can see straight away, you know, if there's going to be a high cost to the material they need for the courses. So that's great. Yeah. Yeah.
And as you probably know, Catherine, a lot of the places where OER has really taken off in the States and in Canada, South Africa, lots of examples that I know of, Australia, is when students have really begun to drive it. You know, so when students experience the value and then they're saying, hey, we want this. And so again, those partnerships between staff and students, you know, really energize it.
Definitely. And I think, you know, for a lot of students, they may not realize they're using open educational resources, you know, because again, it's just another term, you know, that may just, you know, go over people's heads. Because even if we're thinking of our library service, we index open educational resources and open access material alongside our paid for subscribed resources, you know. Yes. So a lot of the resources are accessed in the same way, the free and the paid for. So, you know, that's good as well. But if we're trying to promote OER, you know, as a concept through the college, you know, it's probably about marketing.
Yeah, as you say, that code I think is really wonderful. You know, the ZTC. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks.
Yes, sorry.
Trish, do you want to say anything? I see your comment there.
Who, me? Not really, no, just well done, Catherine. As always, you never disappoint us. Just, I think what you're saying makes a lot of sense. And I think we have to go open educational resources, open education practices. I've been doing it myself because of you for quite a while now. So I think everything I know, I learned from you and Claire in UIG.
That's lovely.
Really.
Okay, it's lovely to know. Well, there you go. Everyone knows that you've been using it for years, so you're a good source of information, local. But yeah, I mean, what you say there resonates, Trish, though, because like I and many of us have been talking about this for years, but I think what's happened in the last year has really just sharpened it for me. You know, I just think it's really important, you know, both for the financial reasons and also pedagogically. And we have such huge problems to address collectively, you know, in not just in higher education, but socially. And you know, what open education does is it provides a really powerful way for us to share and build on each other's ideas. So, you know, if we're going to solve these complex, wicked problems, this is a really, really powerful way for us to, you know, to facilitate that, I think.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right.
Sorry, Catherine, can I ask you one more question?
Absolutely.
So myself and Amaya and another colleague were involved in a bit of a research application for equality, diversity, and in terms of education within a community setting.
Yes.
And I'm just thinking, we often talk of higher education, but working in a community, let's say, of interested in that term of access to resources. I know you mentioned the primary school and use of Wikipedia. Do you think this could operate outside within a community setting, OER and so on?
Absolutely. And yeah, I mean, and it is one of the, you know, it's one of the ways that can be facilitated. So, you know, people often say that, you know, using OER and OEP kind of thin the walls of the classroom. So, you know, it absolutely facilitates those connections, I think, because we're opening what we're doing and we're not having, you know, the creators of knowledge and the receivers of knowledge, which is so often the culture of higher education. You know, we're just having learning and we're all learners. You know, we can all create, you know, we can all teach each other, we can all learn together. So yes, and I mean, and Still We Rise example that I shared is an example of that, because they engaged with the community, you know, with students, educators, librarians, and the community, you know, creating that exhibition about cultural and political figures. So yeah, I mean, and you know, any of the ideas that have come up here, I mean, you have wonderful resources. You have Catherine and Karina and Jessica, but you know, if I can be of any help, or if you want to talk about anything further, you know, that's what the National Forum is for. We're here to support this work, you know, across the sector. So always happy to chat further.
I suppose just going on from that, you know, the public libraries would be doing a lot of, you know, open access and open educational resources, even open data now. You know, we're going big into open data as well. So the public libraries are really going out into the community and developing, you know, these educational resources, these online exhibitions, etc. So definitely, it's not just for academics; it's for you know, everyone.
Yeah, one of the leaders in education who's a friend of mine, but also someone who inspires me a lot, is Rajiv Jangiani. And, you know, he talks about this progression in open education and talks about, you know, come for the cost savings, stay for the pedagogy, and build for social justice. And that's really the path that I think a lot of people take. You know, we really focus on access first and, you know, cost savings, but oftentimes people then really become engaged because of the pedagogy, and then further again about equity, inclusion, social justice, you know, breaking down barriers. You know, that's really, I think, what it's all about.
Definitely. Yeah.
Okay, sorry to interrupt there. I think Sean Daffy has his hand up. Sean is one of our learning technologists in the Teaching and Learning Office. And I know he's working on lots of projects that he's making open and available across the sector.
Yeah, I'm huge into open education resources, but a huge stumbling block I've come across, or not it is surmountable, but a huge gap I'm seeing is that we have open education resources, and just as Ulrich was asking, we need to license them to show people how they can use them. But often when we're creating these resources, we're creating them to be open, but they will within them reference something that has a license. So example, poetry, you know, that'll be someone's work that they need to be paid for and so on. And a huge gap I'm seeing is education in fair use for education in digital multimedia. We really have to talk to staff about how, okay, there is fair use in education, but it has limits. You can't just put a whole video of someone's work that they've released up and talk about it because it's educational. We really have to be getting out guidelines and doing some training into what is fair use in education and how can you remix people's work or add work and reference work in your work that is to be open, but of a work itself that is not open. And I just think that is an area we're going to have to do some serious training and resources in. I'm creating a guideline at the moment just because I'm just seeing such a gap as, rules of thumb for fair use in digital multimedia, because I just don't think people realize that there are rules there. And we do have to respect, we're creating open resources, but there are people, poets, creative people who need to be paid for their work, and we just can't be grabbing it. And, I just see that as a huge gap and a drawback, and we're going to have to be careful and provide training there and be respectful of that.
Here, I agree completely, Sean, and I'd be really keen, if you do produce that guide, there's a page in the new resource, using OER and OEP that the National Forum produced, where we just have introductory information about copyright, because it's really specific, about how institutions are educating staff about that. But if you create a guide, I'd be happy to link to it, from the National Forum resource.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind. I'll send it to you and you could have a look over it as well. It's just, it's in the form of FAQ, frequently asked questions, but it just gives the guidelines, because I'm just seeing people don't realize that you can't just grab work and use it.
Yeah.
And I mean, digital stuff is great. We can put videos up there, but we have to be careful as to what we're doing, and we have to be aware and be really respectful of those guidelines.
Yeah, well, I think you're right. I mean, copyright literacy and fair use literacy is just part of the broader, kind of media and digital literacies for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Great point.
Thanks.
Yeah, and also, Sean, I suppose with Moodle, I think, some people may think it's like a safety net. Oh, it's in my Moodle, I can put anything I want up there because it's only the students on my course that are logging in to see it. But you can't, because it's still online, even though it's behind a login. You have to follow copyright guidelines, licensing, fair data, fair deals as well, So we do have a page on the website about copyright, and specifically copyright for, education. So if you're sharing, for example, library resources in your Moodle, how you can do that. Obviously, we don't want you downloading full ebooks from the library and putting them up on your Moodle, because, we don't know that they're being used then, so we have no statistics. So then next year we might say, well, you haven't used that resource, no one's used it, so we're not paying for it again next year. So there's all that type of stuff.
I'm seeing it all the time with people grabbing great images to illustrate a point or to decorate their Moodle page, and I'm like, where did you get that image?
We can be the Moodle police, Sean.
It's not referenced. No, but it's, we have to be careful.
Yeah, I know, definitely. Yeah, I mean, because people organizations can say, well, we want to, check out your copyright, your legislations, your licenses that you're using within Moodle. It's not completely behind closed walls as people think it is,
I wanted to respond. I want to respond to Sally here, but also just regarding that, I think Sean and Catherine's, what you said is so important. And I'm always reminded of how important modeling practices. Like every single presentation that I've done for years, I always be sure to only use open source images and put the attribution on the slide and so on. And then sometimes people ask you, why do you do that and how to do that? Like, we need to do that. We need to not just teach about it, but model it. But Sally, your point there just about fear, I think is I'm always wary of coming across as this kind of open evangelist, because I really do think it is context specific, but I think sometimes we can come off like that, like everything should be open. But, I've often described it as like someone's open presence is like a pointillist portrait, and everything that you share is a point. And so I've been sharing openly for years. So if I share something that's, a draft or whatever, I don't mind, because, I've got a big, long tail of stuff out there on the web. But maybe someone who's sharing for the first time, that point, that one thing that they share is their presence on the web. So people usually have a lot of, if not fear, at least, concern about what they're going to share and how. But so that's why I think that local support and just sharing in small ways, and even sharing an image or a PowerPoint presentation, those kinds of things can be really the way to start. I don't know what you've been doing so far, Sally, but I thought it was a great point.
Thanks. Yeah, it's just I spend a lot of time teaching learning innovation skills, and I have a lot of ideas and assessments and things that I think are really valuable. But sometimes you feel trepidation about sharing because just in case it was misinterpreted or other people didn't think it was as great as I do.
Yeah. Well, I remember being terrified when I started a blog in, I don't know, 2010 or 2011. I was terrified. I thought, who cares what I say? But what got me over the line was I became aware of lots of educators who were sharing their work, and some of it was draft and some of it was, just specific to their context. And it was really valuable for me to see what other educators shared. And there's that concept of the commons. So I realized, well, if I'm benefiting from what other people are sharing, then I should really share what I'm doing as well. That's what we're all about. Yeah, and that helped me. And then, just gained confidence over time.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, is there any more questions? Anybody else from what I popped in the chat there as well, just to note, I don't know, did you see recently, Catherine, there was Sally Brown and Kay Samble had put together a really nice collection of authentic assessments, and some of them refer to, open education initiatives and co-creating with students and students as partners. But it's a fabulous collection of just going across the disciplines. I put it in the chat. We have it as a resource in the Teaching and Learning Office as well. Yeah. And Trish O'Connell featured in part 2 of the collection recently. Cheers, Trish, and just as an authentic example, and that was she implemented over the last year during COVID. But I really think it's worthwhile, just as we're opening our minds here this morning on open education, and there's a really good example of Sally and Kate sharing such a fantastic collection of assessments for all of us to benefit from who are teaching in higher education. So anyways, it's there and it's available, and
lovely, great
and it's done very simply. She put it together in a Word document and brought together, all the different sources. So I don't know, have you now you won't be able to see it there, Catherine, because it's in our SharePoint, but I can send you a copy of it. It's available on Twitter as well, but it's a nice collection. So,
and I just want to respond to Owen. I put in here that am I not an open evangelist? And I don't consider myself an open evangelist.
I'm only winding you up.
I know you are. I call it critical advocacy, because I would never advocate for anyone. But I mean, I'll just say one thing. When I did the PhD research, I had been encouraging people to think about sharing and using open and so on. And when I did my PhD research, I did qualitative research with 18 members of staff, and 3 of them had personal or family experience of, stalking or kind of abusive behavior online. 3 out of 18. And it was a real wake-up call for me, because I thought that's something that would never come up, even in a workshop or a small workshop or whatever, and yet that's a really important factor for those individuals about what they will and won't do online. So for students, this applies likewise. So that agency, around every individual student or staff about whether they want to be open, how they want to be open, I think is just, it underlies everything. And there's so many ways we can be open that don't require people, to be open themselves. So that you prompted
that's a very good answer, Catherine. I think I suppose the reason for the little jokey smiley faces is when I think of open, I think of you. And in fact, any discussion we've had in recent years about open in education, we can't get one sentence without your name coming for first, because you've done so much in respect to the space. It's fantastic, really. I just one point to say, I suppose, is I'm really heartened by the fact that the European Union, in terms of all their funding and everything going forward, are driving now an open agenda. So it gives people the choice, as you say. You don't have to be if you don't want to, but it creates wonderful opportunities. And I love hearing about your blog as well too, that this whole idea that we of our own right can be open about how we're doing things and share that. And there's always going to be people out there interested in it, for sure. Thanks.
Thanks, Owen.
Thanks, Owen. That's great. Is there any other comments or questions before we finish up with Catherine? Or does the panel have any outstanding questions to raise or?
No, I just want to say thanks to Catherine for really engaging in a presentation and exploring these OER resources and, you know, using them to enhance teaching and learning. So hopefully we'll take a step forward, you know, over the summer and, you know, try and incorporate, you know, some of these into, you know, the library and the other areas within the college as well. So hopefully a few of us will be able to collaborate on, you know, a project moving forward.
Fantastic.
Thanks, Catherine.
Thank you, Catherine. Great insights. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And best of luck in all your work.
Thank you so much, Catherine. It's been just really interesting, your presentation. So we appreciate you coming along today and sharing the resources and reminding us all that's been done, not just by you, but all the work you've done in the National Forum. It's having a big impact on the sector. So thanks very much, Catherine. And I hope you'll be with them a long time. You're staying there for a little while more, I hope.
Well, I'm very happy at the moment. So, I mean, it's really lovely that there's an energy around Open in Ireland at the moment that is really, really wonderful to see. So I'm just thrilled to be working with everyone. So thanks.
Yeah, it's fantastic. It's having a huge impact. So thanks very much. I hope Index might happen again next year as well. That'll be an interesting survey to engage with again.
I hope so too. Yeah. 2022 was kind of a provisional, you know, stake in the ground for running it again. So if people want to do it, yeah.
No, it'll be fantastic for us, for DigitalEd and for iNote, because we got the baseline data pre-COVID, and then to do Index again, it'll be fantastic to see how far we've come. You know,
wouldn't it? Yeah.
In every area. So thanks very much again, and thanks a million to Jessica as well. Jessica's popping in there, who's been organising us all for the week.
Apologies for those tech hiccups. It happens, right? Yes.
That's live TV, Catherine.
I know, and it wouldn't work for me either. So I don't know what went wrong there.
I really enjoyed that. So thanks, and best of luck for the rest of the week. I'll try and pop in when I can.
Yeah, thanks a million. So we're going to take a break now. I think we've a 15-minute break, and
I'm going to leave it on though, just if Maya's here, and she can share.
Maya! Oh, you want to see? Maya did the drawing, did she?
Yeah, I think to be.
Yeah, brilliant. Let's have a look. So this is your story on one page, Catherine.
In progress, I think.
Oh my
wow!
Goodness.
Yeah,
so beautiful.
Fantastic.
Maya, where's Maya?
She's hiding there.
Maya, can we see you?
Amazing. I'll take a picture. Isn't that fabulous? I just love the way it just captures all the words and insights from this morning. It's brilliant.
And Catherine, when we get the final version of this illustration, we can email it to you.
Thank you. Humble thanks, Maya. That is really beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah, what a talent is right. Fiona Malone was saying, Maya was saying there's only about 6 or 7 people. They're a little community of the profession or the role that she's in. There's only 6 or 7 in the, is that right, Maya, you were saying, that does this type of specialist work? So
I'm in a network of 6 or 7 artists, but there are others in the country. But
yeah, it's amazing.
Thank you so much.
Fantastic. So listen, thanks so much, Catherine. We're going to take a break now.
Time for coffee.
Yeah.
We're going to be back at 11.